Hello, welcome to the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast, where we'll be talking to experts across the legal sector to discover the mindsets, behaviours, skills, and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, host and marketing director at Osprey Approach. Today, I'm joined by the founder of Chorus Insight, a business consulting firm specialising in running client experience programs for professional services firms, including law firms. Our guest is also the author of the Client Feedback Playbook and an advocate for the power of feedback and has helped leading UK law firms excel and thrive using the insights gathered. Graham Archbold, welcome, Graham. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for having me on. Very good to see you.
So, today we'll be discussing how law firms can thrive using client insights. We'll cover the importance of creating sustainable client feedback programs and why they fail so you can avoid the pitfalls. We'll also discuss how to measure success, how to turn results into actionable recommendations, and how to prepare for negative feedback. I have the book with me here. It is dogged and has all sorts of markers on here for our conversation today. It was great to read it. So thank you for that, Graham. Before we go into the subject of your book and everything behind that, can you just tell us a little bit more about your background and experience that's led you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So many years ago, I did an MBA up in the northeast of England, and of all the different topic areas you cover, market research was one of them, and I surprised myself in really enjoying that sort of technical area. So much so that I've ended up with a career in it. And I think the appeal is getting to understand what people really want, what their motivators are, what they um, what they want out of the world, that sort of expectation. And yeah, later on, I got the opportunity to join a consultancy. Now living down in sunny Tunbridge Wells in Kent, and yeah, I worked for a consultancy for a few years, looking mostly within professional services firms, finding out what the challenges were, what the issues were within those businesses. And 4 or 5 years ago, I set up Chorus Insight, and now we really focus in on professional services businesses. We set up and run client feedback programs. We do brand tracking. So anything that gives you like an external view of the business to understand it better. And yeah, the nitty gritty of that tends to be running online surveys, conducting personal interviews, really trying to get under the skin of the business and understand things from a client perspective and take that, be able to fix problems individually as we find them, but also understand what the patterns and trends are across a sort of wider base of clients in order to improve the business operationally and strategically to make things better. So, yeah, that's sort of my motivation. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning to be able to help improve businesses in that way.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And all of that experience and knowledge is features in this book that we're going to dive into a little later. The interviews, how to bring those recommendations to life, how to impact those changes within your firm. But you mentioned there how you started and that you enjoyed the market research. It sounds like curiosity is a big sort of feature of your personality there, and I use that word quite a lot on this podcast. I think it's my favorite word of all time, curiosity. I think this plays a big part in client feedback programs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like the key to it all. If you're not interested in finding out, what's going on, not only within businesses but like in the world, what the challenges, what are the drivers, then yeah, it's there's not much to it otherwise.
Yeah, agreed. Get stuck in. Be nosy. That's what I say. So before the book begins, you explain that it's a guide to setting up and running a sustainable client feedback program. And the first page of the first chapter, you highlight that transitioning from an ad hoc to an ongoing program is crucial. Why is a sustainable ongoing program important? And maybe you want to just talk about what that really means.
Yeah, I suppose actually when you say sustainable, I sort of immediately think of environmental things, but it's completely different to that. It's more about continuous and sort of maintained program. Because what I found years ago, going into lots of different firms to find out what kind of feedback function they already had in place, was that people go, "Oh yeah, we did a survey. It was a couple of years ago." And then when you look, you find out actually it was about 5 or 6 years ago. And you go, well, what happened? And you go, oh, it was really good. It was really interesting. We found out lots of things. You're like, why did you only do it once? Like all those years ago, what happened? And when you pick up to then repeat the exercise, you find that the client list's completely different. Well, if we did this well last time, why do we have completely different clients? Why haven't we retained them all? Maybe there's a few there, but a lot of them have gone. So yeah, the thing that concerned me is, well, if you're only asking clients once in a blue moon, it, how are you keeping on top of things? Because the whole thing about market research is that the world's changing, clients' needs and expectations are changing. So you need to constantly be, asking. Not to the extent that you're irritating them like that survey fatigue, but is it too much when somebody's spending thousands of pounds with you to ask them maybe once a year how you're doing? It seems pretty reasonable. So yeah, that's the reason I kind of focus on sustainable, because there's so many firms just sort of have an ad hoc approach. It's a bit knee jerk that something's happened, or maybe you suddenly discover that maybe the client's unhappy, and then you're going to survey them. Well, wouldn't it be better to find out in advance to know these things before you're worried about them leaving? That you can actually improve things and fix problems in advance. So that was kind of the theory. Um, yeah, to sort of enable firms, and particularly marketing and BD departments, to anticipate change and know what's going to happen, so that you don't lose touch, and so that you're not just relying on secondhand market intelligence. Because a lot of firms, if you don't have that way of collecting information about clients, if you're just relying on the professional to tell you what happened over lunch, or explain what might have gone wrong, it's different from hearing directly from the client. So yeah, that was the theory, that it should be ongoing, sustainable, continuous, those kind of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you are right. Even though they're done ad hoc, often the feedback is, oh, we actually learnt a lot, which is even more strange that it was never then redone. Have you seen, is there a difference between, I know our listeners like to know where they sit in the market, and how different their behavior is. Do you see a difference between large firms or small firms having ongoing programs in place? Is it a small firm thing? I mean, maybe that's the assumption, but I'm sure that's not true.
I'm not sure. So yeah, I've seen really good programs and really bad programs at both large and small firms. I think the complaints that I hear about how you make it work well, and keep it as an ongoing thing, vary. So in the larger firms, they'll say, oh, it's easier for the small firms because they're so much more agile and there's less bureaucracy, and they can fix problems, they can close the loop really easily. They only have to convince maybe one or two colleagues to get on board. And then the small firms will say, oh, it's really hard for us because we haven't got the resource and we haven't got the investment. And so I don't think it sort of breaks down those lines. Um, yeah, it can work at either sort of end of the scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to touch on the things that make client feedback programs great and successful, but actually, let's start with, what do you see that makes them fail? What are the top things that are stopping client programs being sustainable or being successful or being effective within law firms?
Mhm. I think it's two or three different things. The biggest one, if you can address at the start, is creating a financial link to the program, because quite frequently, research in general within law firms is sort of seen as a nice to have. It's not an essential thing. It's not a core thing. It's maybe somebody in the marketing team is doing that, but is it an essential part of the business? So you've got to really get attention, and I think the way to do that is to show the financial link. So there's different ways of doing this, but if you can calculate the value of a client, either because you've got the actual figures historic, or because you can sort of put together an almost hypothetical sort of model around it, you can say how much a client's worth. And then where you're tracking information, you're tracking feedback, you can predict whether they're going to stay, whether they're going to leave, and where you can show if you reduce churn. So if you prevent a client from leaving because you've recognized there's something wrong and you fix that problem, how much revenue have you protected? How much have you retained? Likewise, if you've got a happy client, and you're able to expand that relationship and increase the value overall, then those kind of figures, they demonstrate that this is a really good return on investment. So that's the kind of number one thing. So where things have gone wrong, it's usually because it's not a priority. People can't see the financial value. So if you can do that, that makes a big difference. The second thing, sort of allied to that, is getting leadership buy-in. So it can't be that there's just some individual somewhere in the business responsible for collecting feedback. It's got to be that it's understood across the business that we are client focused, genuinely client focused, and part of that is that we listen to clients, we take their feedback, and we undertake actions off the back of that to improve their experience. And there's lots of different ways. Maybe we'll talk about it, the way that you can get senior leaders involved. One of them goes back to that point about financial interests. Um, and then I suppose the practical element of collecting feedback, it is quite a big undertaking. I think quite often BD teams underestimate what's involved, and quite a lot of it can be a manual process in going through lists of data. So one of the biggest complaints I get is, well, we really want to survey clients, but the state of our CRM system or the way that the practice management system doesn't talk to this system, you know, we're gonna have to spend so much time extracting things from Outlook and so on that it's an overwhelming task. So I think addressing some of those issues, um, around list building, around getting approval to be able to go and talk to particular clients. You've got to address those things before you can sort of build a successful program.
Yeah, absolutely. The practicalities, the foundations of actually the process involved of surveying these people is definitely crucial. And then your other points you mentioned, getting senior leadership buy-in, so making sure it's a priority across the firm, and then creating that financial link, which we know with senior leadership teams that's where the buy-in usually comes from, is making that connection either to the strategy or the long-term goals of the company. So I think that's definitely a good place to start. And I mean, to be honest, from my own experience of trying to embed client feedback programs throughout businesses, it's always hard if it doesn't form part of everybody's habits. Everybody
Mm.
forgets, or I'll do it tomorrow, or it becomes cumbersome to add, notifications to remind you. And you mentioned there that they often fail because they're difficult and really manual. What's your tips for creating an easy program that once you've got that buy-in, that increases uptake with everyone and everyone's on board with you?
That's interesting. Yeah, I suppose there's a few things to that. One thing is, I suppose I'm often talking about looking for the problems to fix, from a client experience perspective. But the truth is, you get so much positive feedback, and sometimes that's the problem that you're trying to get to the nitty gritty, and you've got so much positive. But I think that's one of the ways to start is to use the positives. So there's lots of people within the business who don't get recognized, particularly within law firms. So, the partner tends to have lots of interaction, but maybe the associates don't. How often does the IT team get feedback on how well the systems have worked or how pleased clients are? Being able to share positive feedback, praise, and really celebrate that. I think that's one way that it becomes easier, where there's less of a fear of feedback, that people look forward to hearing from clients. I think is sort of alongside that, where you do get detractors, it's thinking about, from an internal point of view, how do we make things easier for people? And sometimes it turns out you shouldn't be doing business with particular clients, and you can relieve some of the pains internally by saying, actually, we've identified these clients aren't the ones that we should be working with, and you can offload those. So thinking about it as a sort of benefit to people within the business, and sharing how that's going to be of help. I think that's a means of making it more appealing, um, to get people to buy in and want to put clients forward and be involved.
Maybe a slightly off-topic question, but it's just come to me as you were explaining that. I think a lot of the times client satisfaction or client feedback is often linked to performance for internal employees. And I wonder whether, and I'd love your opinion on, does that taint people's want to share feedback if it's directly linked to their, is that a good thing to do? Would you recommend that? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely not. So I think it comes from a really good place. So
Mhm.
there's a firm we used to work with. Um, they had a good program in place, did lots of one-to-one interviews. Um, they were really good at sharing feedback internally. It was like pretty positive overall, and that was up and running for a while. And then the chief exec decided that everyone knows what their net promoter score is. We're now going to link remuneration to net promoter score alongside these other KPIs. And of course, it just completely gamed the system from there on. So everybody just wanted you to survey the happy clients. They didn't want you to collect a bad score. They suddenly want you to ask net promoter score in a way that kind of primes people to give you positive scores and things like that. Um, so Amy, I think that was your question. That was
Mhm.
whether or not that's a good thing. I suppose you do want to have targets,
Mhm.
or clear objectives for the program, but I would say don't make it outcome based on those scores. So more important is to um, get engagement. So I would say things like, are we reaching all clients? So it might be that you've got 30 key clients. Are we surveying, probably a one-to-one interview with someone at each of those clients every year and getting their opinion? Is there an online survey going out giving opportunity to all clients to respond? So those kind of things I would say are better objectives, particularly at the start of a program, rather than incentivizing really top scores, because then you get those survey the requests that are kind of like begging you for a good score, and it's a pretty sad situation when you get to those.
Yeah, it
Um,
it just impacts culture internally, doesn't it? And really, you don't get the honesty and the feedback that you truly need from your clients if you're cherry picking the ones that are applying to you. I had a survey email come to me. I won't name the company, even though I've forgotten anyway, but the feedback form said, please leave your feedback, but only 8 and above, else it impacts the company and the team.
right.
I'm thinking, I'm not sure that's the point of asking for feedback.
Yeah, yeah. It's really frustrating. I get those as well, where yeah, they sort of make you feel guilty if you don't give a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10. And it's clearly, someone centrally has set an objective, um, and then at a more kind of local level where they've got control over sending out the survey, add all this sort of bias to it. I think one of the things to recognize is this: the difference between collecting feedback where it's really a testimonial, so like a direct for directories or something like that. Naturally, you just want positive feedback for that because it's going to go, in chambers or legal 500. So you're only going to put people forward for those that are going to say good things. Or if it's, if you're getting people to fill in review solicitors or something like that, you only want positive on those sites because it's public. But the kind of exercise we're talking about, it's we want the critical stuff. That's where all the value is. We want to hear all the like harsh truths. We want to hear all the things that have gone wrong because that's gold. That's what we're going to use to improve the business operationally and strategically. So yeah, I think the culture part is difficult. You've got to really create an environment where people are comfortable with receiving criticism,
Hmm.
and for people to feel safe that they're not going to, they're not going to be impacted for having got the feedback. That's yeah. So yeah, we want to incentivize people to get as much feedback as they can, the volume of feedback, rather than work out how we're going to punish them because they got a bad score.
Yeah, I think that distinction is a really good one between achieving case studies and testimonials for things for your brand and marketing and PR, and then for actually gathering feedback to help operationally and internally and strategically. I think that's a good distinction, and sort of goes back to your point about having someone in marketing running this and managing this. Having one person, but crucially someone in marketing, probably isn't the best place because it's not just marketing that this impacts. If you're collating feedback internally, it's actually how it impacts the business strategically and what you choose to do and not to do and those items. So I think, yeah, it's a really good distinction. Just going back to your point at the beginning about how you got into this and your curiosity, at the beginning of the book, you share your own mission is to help people better understand each other and promote listening, empathy, and collaboration. So, of course, you advocate for that in business. That's exactly what you do. But I know you're also passionate about how that impacts employees. Why do you think there is such a gap between how good of a listener we believe we are and the actual reality of this? And I say this collectively, not just law firms, but everybody. I think we all believe we're good listeners when really we're just waiting to speak.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think it's a bit like that kind of how good a driver are you? Well, everyone's above average, aren't they?
Brilliant. Yeah.
I mean, I like even personally, I do this for a living. All I do is interview people and take down their feedback and collect feedback. But am I the best listener? Well, not necessarily. I think what's really important is um, objectivity. So having somebody collect the feedback, and this doesn't necessarily have to be an external consultant, but somebody who's not the one who's delivering the service. Because if you're the one who manages the relationship, delivers the service, it's really hard for you not to be like in the thick of it, to be so someone brings something up and you go, oh, I know what the technical solution is to that, rather than just sort of, oh, tell me more about that, and listen and try and understand and try and empathize to some extent, and really tease out all the information you can to then go away and sort of put a plan together and decide how to fix things, rather than just immediately knee jerk be like, oh well, we can fix this, we can fix that, or in the worst case, it's like get a bit emotional about it and kind of go, no, you're wrong. This is kind of a natural tendency for some people is to go, no, you've got this wrong, and I'm going to tell you why. Whereas, a listening exercise is about getting understanding. So yeah, to me, it's having a third party to do that sort of reality check, and that doesn't mean, as I say, it doesn't have to be someone completely external to the business. It's just somebody who's not necessarily involved in the relationship. So some firms will use a sort of they'll give them a title like an independent advisory partner, or it's somebody from a different practice area, or ideally, I'd say someone from BD and marketing team who is there to really get a better understanding of the client, of the business needs, and as I say, not sort of get defensive or focus on the sort of technical aspects of the delivery to get an understanding more broadly. So yeah, that's my thinking there for um, listening. I mean, there are lots of techniques that will make you better at listening, but I think it's having the right person do it in the first place.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great shout. I think we'll come on to talk about how to take bad feedback, but it can become very personal very quickly if it's somebody who is too close to the matter or the client. I know you're an avid reader yourself, so do you have any book recommendations or anything that you've read to assist with being a better listener? Is there anything on your reader book?
Oh, that's a good question. For being a better reader, and there's lots of books out there that sort of talk about empathy and understanding. Um, I'm not sure I can think of a specific one though.
Maybe come back to me. We'll put it in the show notes. I put you on the spot there, so maybe come back to me.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have a think. Yeah, there's definitely sort of techniques for that. I mean, one thing is I mean, this is kind of more for relationships than commercial relationships. Is when you know like if you can paraphrase, or maybe not even like more accurately describe what someone else's point of view is. So you have to keep repeating it until the other person is satisfied that you have properly explained their point of view.
Mm,
And you can kind of go back and forth many times before you really have got it. You know, you've demonstrated that you've really understood it. So something like that is quite useful in conversation to say, right, have I got this right? And then you know repeating it back. Um, can't think of the source of that though, where that's come
I've
from.
heard it too. Yeah, I can't think
Okay.
either. But we'll rip them off anyway, and we'll claim it as our own. But yeah, no, I think that is a good shout in commercial and business relationships, especially when it comes to feedback. I mean, we see this a lot in technology. All law firms want the technology to do exactly how they want it to do it. But sometimes it's not about hearing the first initial bit of feedback of, oh, the system, if only it did this. Actually, it's diving a little bit deeper and regurgitating that fact to really get to the crux of the problem. What is it that they're trying to solve? Because they're not developers or product builders, so they don't know the best features to input into a software, but they do know the best problems they're trying to overcome. So it's really teasing that information and going below the surface, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, because it's you know you're trying to diagnose a problem, but you know the person you talk to might not describe it in such a way that you can immediately go, oh, you know, you said this, it must be that. It's yeah, it's a um, yeah, it's an exercise in understanding. You've got to sort of work it out slowly sometimes and come back
Mm.
around and go through it multiple times.
Absolutely. We talked briefly about for feedback programs to be successful, you've got to have leadership buying. And one of the ways to do that, we talked about having those financial KPIs attached to that. How, other than linking financials, how else would you measure the success of a client feedback program? What should firms be looking to achieve out of the back of them?
Yeah, I suppose I mean, ultimately, it's yeah, are you growing as a business? So are you using the information that you're gathering to grow individual relationships? Are you using it to help you, you know, understand wants and needs so that you win new business elsewhere? Um, I think it's also things like are you sort of collecting from the whole client base? So that's to me is a good sort of way of tracking things to how effective you're doing things. The response rates, so that's often the frustration, particularly with online surveys. I mean, one-to-one interviews, you know, you'll get a sort of if you're asking important clients, you'll get a sort of 90% plus response rate. Everyone's going to give you some time online surveys are always a challenge, but I think that's it's a good indicator of engagement. So if you've got good relationships, um, then people will will take the time to complete surveys. But yeah, I suppose the bigger one is the impact, and that comes from are you collecting and using the insight and then closing the loop. So fixing problems, addressing things, you know, using the best practices or developing best practices from what you've learned, because then there's a sort of flywheel effect that the more that your clients see that you use feedback effectively and you make changes individually for them and across the business, then the more willing they are to take part again in future. So they recognize that you really are client focused because listen, you know, most firms have got in their materials that they're client focused, but what's the evidence of that? Well, have they actually listened to you and changed things and made improvements as a result? Um, so yeah, and the thing we were talking about before um, about the financial impact. So hopefully we're going to be able to evidence that churn has reduced, spend has increased. You know, those clients that have taken part and we've spent time with and we've made changes for, are they as a result spending more with us? Because that's ultimately why we're doing this. You know, we're doing research, but it's commercial research. It's not just academic. We want to be able to put a sort of pound sign next to it in terms of return.
Yes, I think there's probably a split between measuring success on the outcomes and the recommendations and the changes from the program. And I guess there's also a look at how successful is your actual program? Is there things you need to change logistically on how you deliver the program and what questions you're asking and things like that? I guess there's some metrics aligned to the program itself.
Yeah, I suppose that's where you see it in engagement,
Hmm.
because there's always that balance that to have people come back and participate again. Well, you want to keep some of the questions the same because you want to be able to track trends over time. That's really helpful to have to see how you're performing for a particular client, and that's where you can say, oh, something's sort of downtrending. We need, that's where we need to act. But at the same time, you need, I suppose, novelty to some extent. People want to be asked different things and discuss different matters, and the world changes. So, there's all different topics that you're going to want to cover besides satisfaction and service ratings. So a lot of the time it's going to be technology and innovation at the moment. At the moment, obviously, we're talking to clients a lot about AI. At other times, it will be, more social issues. It'll be different kinds of challenges within their industry. Um, so yeah, having some varieties is really important, and you then see how effective your surveying is in engagement levels.
Have you got an example of a question that we wouldn't expect to go into a client survey that actually is really useful? Because I mean, we can all assume the usuals. How satisfied are you? How was the support? How did it go? Would you use this again or recommend us? All of those types of questions we'd expect to be in there. But is there anything that sort of ends up being really helpful for law firms that myself and the listeners wouldn't expect to be in there?
Okay, so there's some quite sort of fun left field type of questions, maybe where you start to talk about brand. So
Mm.
one issue you've often got is where service is partner led. Um, you talk about the individual service, but then you say, "Oh, well, tell me about the firm as a whole." And we do things like, what three words come to mind when you think about
Mm.
the brand. Um, there's that kind of, if there were this, what would they be? Different variations, and you have a bit of fun with it. I think, yeah, particularly interviews one to one, you can ask some left field fun stuff. The surveys, I suppose the surveys where you put tailoring in, so that it's a more the survey is more of a kind of journey based on their responses, and they have their own kind of experience. That makes it more interesting. We try and do those wherever possible. That sort of tailoring, so it's more relevant.
Mm.
Um, yeah, but a question that you wouldn't expect. Maybe the three words. Um, anything where you focus on them and their challenge. I think particularly that in interviews. Um, that's that. What's keeping you awake at night? And rather than saying, well, us as the firm, how great are we? Give me scores. Turning it around and saying, well, what are the challenges? And of course, it's good to understand, in order to tweak the way service delivery is. But actually, it's also where lots of your opportunities come along from, because you
Mm.
you find out, about needs that they didn't realize that you can help with. I think that's quite common with law firms where maybe services being quite sort of siloed. If you're asking more broadly about their business, that's where you discover, lots of things that the partner didn't realize because the partner's been focused on, this particular piece of litigation and hasn't stopped to say, well, what's happening in the rest of the business, and then you discover there's lots of other things. So,
Yeah, I love
well,
that three-word question. I'm gonna steal it because it's It is interesting what clients come back, and I'm sure there will be some fascinating answers, but it tells such a good insight into how you're being perceived and how you're moving around the sector. So, yeah, I love that idea. I think that's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I find brands because we do brand tracking as well as client
Mm,
feedback. It's not in the book, but that's one that's much more kind of emotive, and you can explore in different ways. Like we ask about brand archetypes, for example, the sort of the 12 different personas and things like that. And you can usually get a feel for the person you're talking to, whether or not they're going to sort of play along with that.
mhm.
Maybe you might get a feel you go, this question probably isn't for them, we'll skip that. But certain people you'll ask different questions to.
Yeah, and there are going back to your point about the survey taking a journey. There are so many really good survey tools out there that allow you to do that. If you answer yes to this, they get this series of questions rather than that series of questions, and it is fairly easy to do now. So it's not something that's out of reach for anybody really. Going back to the book, there is a whole chapter focusing on the right research approach and methods. It's packed full of advice, highly recommend. But one of the ways in there that we've talked about already is gathering insight in in-depth personal interviews. So I think we're all probably au fait with the survey. We're happy to get those going, send those out maybe once every 5 years, as you mentioned earlier. But that's the norm. Why should firms be dedicating time to running personal interviews? Why is that so important?
So it's funny because so I meet some marketing BD directors that are just in one camp or the other. They just want to do online surveys, or they just want to do personal interviews, and some that want to do both. And I'm in that sort of camp that thinks we should take a hybrid approach. I think with the interviews, there's just so much depth, and there's so much nuance, and it allows you to really dig into whatever's important to the clients and to explore different things and really get under the skin that if for significant clients that are really valuable, it's just madness not to have those kind of conversations. That's where the actual interview itself helps cement the relationship because it shows an investment in them, and then there's so much you can use that comes out of it that you're going to go back with to the business and be able to use in lots of different ways. So yes, you find out where service is weak or strong. You find out if it's a technology problem, if it's a particular individual that needs to change something. You discover where your processes are strong or weak, but you can really explore. It's more of an inductive exercise, whereas a survey you go in with set choices. You get very little open text response. People will give you maybe one sentence versus an interview of an hour that will give you 6,000 words. You're effectively getting an essay written by your client in terms of response. There's so much in there once you get into it. Um, Across all different kinds of things, what their views are on added value and technology, expectations of service going forward, talking about the different teams that within your firm and individuals and how everyone's delivering. It's just so much in there. Um, yeah, it's just such a good investment. I think, as we were saying before, the more you have an independent person going in there, sometimes allows them to ask naive questions.
Mm.
So, the person doing the delivery, she's probably not going to want to ask about competitors or maybe a little bit inhibited about talking about price because it's a bit sensitive, and it's hard to ask about. But particularly if you've got somebody who's independent, you can go and get scores on value for money and whether or not budget's been managed properly without worry about damaging the relationship, the one-to-one with the person who's delivering it because it's separate. Yeah, I think personal interviews as a research method is brilliant. And then you do them and you kind of you put together hypotheses about what's happening with clients, and that's where you can then go and test it with online surveys afterwards. You say, well, we've got a lot of clients that think this. Let's ask the broader client base, see whether or not they agree, and then maybe you discover, right, well, retail clients think this, financial institution clients think this, and you can do your segmentation. That sort of second stage with a larger sample from the online survey, the sort of quant side of things. So yeah, I love doing both. And yeah, you really shouldn't skip doing interviews.
Yeah, I mean with an online survey, I try my best to fill them out because I know how important they are, being in the marketing team. So I try to do it for other brands, but you expect it to be quick. I think if you're doing a survey online and it's more than a few minutes,
Yeah.
5 minutes, you sort of get a bit, Christ, how long is this going to go on for? But if you've dedicated that time in your diary to have a one-to-one interview, you've prepped yourself that that's the case, and you've prepped yourself to dedicate the time, and you're
Mm.
more in that mindset of going, okay, they actually care to listen. I'm going to tell them how they feel. So I think it's also a mindset shift for the client on the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's a meeting that's in your calendar, you're more likely to turn up to it, whereas an online survey you can forget about, or
Delete.
it seems like hard work sometimes. And actually, the interviews don't have to be an hour. I think that's more for big relationships where maybe it's something you're doing something post matter, and it's been a smaller value thing, but it's been significant enough to spend some time on. Maybe it's a 15-minute interview, and as long as the expectations set beforehand that's how long it's going to be, as long as you stick within that, I think
Mhm.
people sort of respect that and appreciate that.
You mentioned that it should be a third party to do the interviews, just to make that separation. Is there anybody that you would or wouldn't recommend within a typical law firm structure? Should it be someone in marketing or a client success team, or should it be a senior leadership? Is that bad or good? Do you have any recommendations who should conduct them?
Yeah, so I mean, there are instances. So we've just last year trained some senior execs within a large firm in how to conduct interviews, and they're going in as the third party because they're not the ones actually delivering the work. And it's a good thing that they're going in and listening and asking, but I don't think it's ideal in the sense that they have got a vested interest, and the kind of conversations that a senior person has conducting interviews is different because I think the client doesn't want to bring up trivial stuff. So if you've got the managing partner going in, you're less likely to bring up niggly things. You're kind of, oh well, we better have a big strategy conversation. Um, so I think it's somebody who can sort of has got license to talk about the little nitty-gritty annoying things and not only the bigger stuff, and
Mm,
who it doesn't have so much vested interest in it. I
mm,
think yeah, describing if you've got customer success teams and individuals, they're suited. I mean, I think almost anybody can be trained as an interviewer, um, as long as they're sort of going to dedicate themselves to listening and understand that they are there, not to fix problems there and then, not to pontificate and go on and on, just to ask good questions and listen and tease out as much as you can. So yeah, I think it works well when you've got marketing professionals, business development professionals conducting those kind of interviews. There's often that kind of, oh, we really want the managing partner to go in and do this. Well, have they got the technical skills to, you know, accurately collect the information that the person's giving you? Because the downside is if the partner comes out and all they've got is a few notes on the back of an envelope, that's, versus having 15 pages of insight, it's a bit frustrating if that's all you get out of it.
mm.
Um, So yeah, I'm obviously biased. I think it should be an independent person. Um, that's the best way to collect that kind of insight.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's really good advice and something to consider. How do your biases impact the interview going into that? I think that's important to consider. So
Hmm.
obviously we've talked about collating the feedback, but one of the most important bits of a client success program is of course doing something with the data that you've gathered. So
Mhm.
how do you go about turning the feedback, the findings into actionable recommendations? How does that process work?
So what often surprises people is just how much you get.
Mm.
So even if it's 30 in-depth interviews, you've got masses of sort of intelligence there on the market, on the client experience, and so many different things. If you've conducted surveys and you've got hundreds of responses, you might only have a few sentences per, but in terms of data points or scores and things from maybe a 5 minute survey, it's massive. So obviously there's lots of number crunching to do, but ultimately you're looking to find out what are the pain points for each client, and have we got the quick fixes for each of those? And even if we can't necessarily fix it, first step, can we go back and thank people for taking the time, acknowledge what they are, and set out some steps that might not solve the problem 100%, but show that the person's been listened to and that you're working on it, and that there is a sort of a route to improvement. So I think that's kind of the most important thing. Most of the time, we're looking at gap management. So we're finding out what was the expectation and what did we deliver. And naturally, if we've exceeded expectation or at least met it, then you tend to have happy clients. And where we've missed, where we've undershot that sort of baseline, that's where we want to then go away and work out what the issues are. If we can fix them right away, sometimes it's a phone call. It's take me off this list, put the client on that one. Um, but then what can we find out from that deeper analysis at the aggregate level? What's true for different client for lots of different clients, and how can we address that? So we're looking for patterns within the data. We're looking for trends where things are changing over time, and then identifying what needs to be done. And I suppose that's accountability. It's deciding who's going to do what and by when. So effectively having um, a sort of a system of accountability. And firms set that up differently, but often it's some kind of um, committee that has an overview of how the program's working and is ensuring that, okay, this is a job for the account manager. This is something that needs to be dealt with by IT, or maybe it's to do with the billing system. We're going to take that to finance, and just ensuring that in order to close the loop, it's clear who's going to be accountable for fixing it, communicating clearly with the client about what's happening and when. Again, so everyone's expectations are managed.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you do you believe that one of the reasons why sustainable ongoing programs don't tend to happen is because people are worried about having to do the work that comes out the back of them?
Maybe. I think that is a factor.
Yeah.
Like if you're busy and someone says, "Well, we could find out all the things that are wrong and create additional projects." Maybe that's it. There's sort of an aversion to the truth and knowing what could be improved. I suppose there's a difference between what leadership wants out of something and what an individual sort of practitioner wants.
Hmm.
And sometimes, feedback programs there to be used by leadership to sort of audit how effectively things are being done and to make improvements in spite of individuals within the business. Not everyone buys into the process, and chances are they're often the ones that need to be helped in terms of change management. So yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, great shout. Linking to potential negative feedback, that there is a section in the book on dealing with that and sharing, obviously when things are going well and it's praise, it feels good, but you say, boy, does it hurt when something's personal, hits a nerve, or feels outright undue. That's a direct quote from the book. And it does, it hits hard. So how should firms be preparing for that negative feedback? Is there something that can be done before it arrives to make sure that people feel they can deal with it effectively?
Yeah, I think so. Whoever is managing the process, whoever's responsible for the program, needs to be aware that that may happen. So, most of the time we're getting fairly positive feedback, and we're really talking about best practices and saying, okay, well, this team or department's doing a fantastic job. How can we replicate this across the business for others? There are instances um, when you get some shocking feedback. You find out that that key client that's been with you for 10 years and is worth, however many £100,000 is actually really hacked off and ready to go. And so being able to deal with that in a way um, that sort of de-escalates is really important, because what can happen is that an individual will get feedback if it comes straight to that lawyer, and they go, that's absolutely wrong. The client's got that wrong. I'm going to get on the phone and I'm going to tell them that they're wrong. That's the worst thing. And it's like kind of understandable, because people, there's a sort of, when you get negative feedback, there's that sort of process. It's a bit like grieving.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I use slightly different terminology. It's like, first of all, it's kind of denial. That no, this can't be true. This has got to be, I'm going to find out what they really think. Um, and then there's a point of sort of deflation where they go, oh yeah, I've really let the team down here, or maybe I did get something wrong. And then eventually they get to acceptance and they go, okay, well, maybe the client does think that, and it didn't go quite as well as I thought. At that point, you've then got to kind of like scoop them up and go, okay, right, we're going to get through this, and what can we do to fix it? Um, so yeah, sorry, I mean, I'm trying to forget, I'm trying to remember what your question was exactly now, but um,
How to prepare for that negative feedback? Is there anything that the firm can do to assist ahead of time so this doesn't feel so heavy?
yeah, so I suppose it's let people know what the process is going to be, and
Mm.
it's to act as an intermediary, so that you're gonna coach the individual where they've had negative feedback. It's who's going to sit down and have that conversation, and have you already got a plan in place so that you don't get that knee-jerk response. I think that's what's important, and also I think something we should acknowledge is that you sometimes get feedback and it is unfair. um, we talk about detractor feedback, so the people who scored you poorly, particularly if it's on NPS, um, recognizing sometimes that they are wrong, and quite often, um, the problem is you shouldn't be doing business with them. I've seen this, and actually, there's an accountancy firm recently I saw do this really well, where they categorized their detractor clients and decided which ones that they were getting negative feedback. They weren't servicing them very well, because as a business, they had outgrown that relationship. So they shouldn't really be serving those smaller clients anymore. And those clients were unhappy because, yeah, they weren't getting the service level they expected, because the fees weren't high enough to justify it. Um, and so being able to do that and say, right, well, actually, the plan should be we should offload this client. They should go somewhere else. I think that's part of it as well. Recognizing where the client isn't the right client.
Yeah, I mean, it all goes back to the culture and strategy point at the beginning. We've definitely had several episodes on the podcast talk about if everybody is clear on your strategy and your values and your mission, not only is it easy to say yes, but it's actually really easy to say no. It's easy to turn down things that aren't right for you and say no to new ideas and new clients. And actually, it applies here as well. If you're really clear on what you want to achieve and how you're going about that and what you want to do as a business, it's really easy to go, these clients just aren't for us. We're not a match made in heaven. We're never going to make each other happy. Let's call it quits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite brave. I respect the firms that do that because
Mm,
usually um, they'll work really hard to try and win that client round. Sometimes that's the right thing to do, and other times it's a losing battle.
yeah.
You're better off just cutting your losses.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's definitely a good best practice as part of the feedback that sometimes, it is unfair and let's say no to those. So obviously getting leadership buy-in and communicating to the board is really important. And we've talked about how you're going to get outcomes out of this. You're going to get things that you need to improve upon. You are probably going to get negative feedback or things that clients find challenging. What are your top tips for communicating all of that to the board? How do you go about explaining that in a way that continues buy-in and make sure that the program is successful?
I think appealing not only to sort of the logical, rational side, but the emotional side as well. So um, you can put lots of stats in front of some people, and that's persuasive. So you're going to say, okay, 8 out of 10 clients think this, or our performance score is 82% or whatever. And particularly where you've got relative comparisons. So you've got benchmarks against other firms, for instance. You can understand your performance on that. And you can make arguments, you can build arguments for change around that. You're going to say, okay, we need to invest in system X because clearly this one isn't working, or we should be uh, trying to develop clients in a different market, based on the research you've got. But sometimes it's a bit too stark. So you need the stories, you need the anecdotes that go around it, and that comes a lot from a lot of those interviews. And so it can be a more powerful argument to say, okay, client X has given us feedback this month, and tell a story. So they were unhappy with these particular elements, and this particular thing went wrong, and the people in the board know that client, they maybe know the individual, and that just really brings it home and it gives it shape and feeling in a way that the numbers don't. So in terms of communication, I think it's using both aspects to be more convincing. I think, yeah, the firms that do client feedback best have the strongest programs, have got a link into the board. So the board gets that pack that they sit down with to go through before the meeting and or go through during the meeting. And yeah, it's got all the financial data in there for performance, but um, as it's also got the client perspective, and so they know that that's going to be in there. That there's going to be some quotes. There's going to be the stats, and the expectation that it's always in there. I think the firms that are doing well, it's just it's part of the management information that they receive, and they expect it to be there.
Mm.
So I think that's the sort of key thing that there's competitor and market insight built in. Um, I think just generally communication wise, you've got to have that market perspective and that client perspective in the likes of partner conferences or AGMs, wherever you've got the opportunity to raise the voice of the client and have people aware of that. So it's not a quick tip actually. Not quite what you've asked me for, but in terms of it's got to really be embedded in the culture. So you've got to have a sort of ongoing campaign,
Mm.
communication campaign. I think that's the sort of key thing, so that the messages are being disseminated on a continuous basis within the business through lots of different channels, so that there's an awareness and there's an expectation um, that that's how you're going to be client focused.
I think that's a great top tip and probably something that's really overlooked because what you said about making sure it's part of the board pack and the management reports feels really obvious, but actually it's probably often not in there. So I think actually for those people who are collating their reports should be thinking about, okay, what feedback can I collate in here? And then the board should be expecting to see those things and taking time to discuss them and consider them. So that's a great top tip. And I'm sure there's plenty of people listening who would go, I'm not sure we have client feedback in our board pack, so they'll take that one away. I'd like to end the conversation on some practical advice for prioritizing change. So we mentioned before the feedback you can gather can feel quite overwhelming, especially if you're in the early stages of a program. Perhaps you're receiving volumes of things, and it can feel like a lot. What is your guidance for prioritizing change? Perhaps you've had recommendations and loads of things great ideas for how you can improve. How do you go about choosing the ones that you should or shouldn't do?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, if you've got the program up and running and you've got insights coming back in from clients, you're going to have broadly two levels. You're going to have account level feedback that gives you quick fixes. So addressing very specific things. Somebody's not happy with the frequency of the billing or the level of information within the invoice. It's that kind of thing that you can go back and you can say, okay, we're going to restructure this, or they want the updates on Friday afternoons. It's kind of quick fix stuff, and hopefully you've got enough of those that you can show that you're helping retain clients. You sort of tick that box. Um, the thing is you're going to get so many of those. You've got to be able to see the pattern across them. So you're going to say, well, what's going to make a big difference for a large number of clients or our most important clients. So it's a really good analysis to spot the patterns in there. And then when you've got 100 different things that you could potentially fix, picking the one that's the sort of strongest lever that's going to make the biggest difference across the firm. I think that's the key thing. So there was a firm a few years ago we worked with on a sort of ongoing basis over a number of years, and they identified that the driver of a lot of the problems was project management. And so rather than sort of work on 10 different things, they said we're going to upskill on project management. We're going to invest in project management. So the lawyers all got training, um, workshop sessions on how to project manage. And it wasn't very complicated. It was a lot of how do you put together a schedule and stick to it. Um, they changed some of the processes internally. It was like simple checklist stuff to make sure that things weren't missed. And in sort of technology terms, they put like a kind of plug-in into Microsoft systems that worked within Word, for example. And so that they really just focused in on project management, and they did as much as they could to improve that. And of course, over the years, we tracked their performance in terms of the ratings that clients gave them for project management, and they improved. But it took like an almighty effort to do that. So if you try and fix too many things all at once, communication, it doesn't work because people internally don't know what it is they're trying to improve. Um, it needs to be really focused. It needs to be communicated and clear that that's our objective is to move this score from here to here, and it might take us 2 years to do it, but we think that that's going to be the biggest payoff in terms of client satisfaction. That's going to make the biggest difference. So yeah, don't try and do everything at once. Pick whatever you think is going to make the biggest difference to clients and the biggest sort of improvement overall.
Yeah, great way to end the conversation. And if we can end on a book review, book recommendation, sorry, is Atomic Habits. So they speak in there about the 1% incremental change and the big impact just improving by 1% can have. That book inspired our Build Better Habits series, which is our webinar series that sits alongside the podcast. So yeah, highly recommend that book if you've not read it, and absolutely explains everything Graham just mentioned as his guidance for prioritizing change. So thank you so much, Graham, for joining me. Here is the book. I highly recommend. It's available now. We'll put all the links in the show notes. But thank you so much, Graham, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you for being such a good interviewer.